Hello and welcome to the Federal. The Union Cabinet today accepted the recommendations of the high-level committee formed by the Narendra Modi government in its last term to recommend the suggestions, the framework, the feasibility of conducting synchronized polls, synchronized elections for the Lok Sabha, the state assemblies, all the state assemblies, as well as the local bodies, which are the panchayats, the municipal corporations, the municipal councils. This was a committee that was headed by former President of India, Ramnath Kovind, and this was formed last year, just around the time when the India bloc was finally taking shape. It was coalescing together, and at that point in time, many in the opposition had, of course, objected to this whole idea of what is popularly being called one nation, one election, simultaneous polls, synchronized polls to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies as well as the municipal bodies, the local bodies. The committee had various deliberations. Uh, it was stacked, as the opposition pointed out, by people who were either directly or indirectly close to the government. The opposition at that point in time had also said that the entire discussions for this panel or by this panel were being conducted in a manner that would that uh, basically steered the discussions towards a very predictable outcome, which was to give a very resounding thumbs up for simultaneous polls, and that the entire exercise was not an objective one. Of course, when the report was submitted on predictable lines, it endorsed the need for synchronized elections. Today, the government, the Narendra Modi government, which of course has been voted back to power, but is no longer a majority government in the sense that the BJP on its own does not have a majority. It relies on allies. And so the Union Cabinet, chaired by the Prime Minister, met today. It was also, in a sense, an important cabinet meeting because it marked the 100 days tenure of the current government. And one of the key announcements that the government made after the cabinet meeting, was that the recommendations made by the HLC or the high level committee under former President Kovind, those recommendations for conducting simultaneous elections have been accepted. Uh, we do not know whether there were any discussions on accepting the report in toto or only selective parts of it, but we've been told that the recommendations have been accepted. Now, as soon as these reports came out, of course, the opposition protested. The Congress president, Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, was on record. He was at the time addressing a press conference with regard to the Haryana elections that are, to be held on the 5th of October. And he said that simultaneous elections are completely unacceptable to us. They are against the federal structure. They are against the constitution. They are against the principles of democracy. Uh, Various other opposition parties, the CPM, the RJD, the Samajwadi Party, all of them have reacted in a similar fashion. The government, of course, has said that they will have further consultations, but in principle, there is a nod for simultaneous elections. The Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, when he was briefing the media on the various decisions of the cabinet taken today, said that there was an overwhelming view in favor of the simultaneous elections, even if a majority of the opposition parties, which are, of course, in greater numbers in the current parliament than they were in the current Lok Sabha than they were, in the previous one when this committee was actually set up. That yes, they may have objected, but then the overwhelming view is for these elections. Now, there are a few interesting aspects here on the timing of this decision, whether this decision, will indeed be implemented, by when will it be implemented, what is the timeline, and curiously, this announcement by the government comes at a time when you are in the middle of assembly elections for Haryana and Jammu and Kashmir. 2 months down the line, you have assembly elections for Jharkhand and Maharashtra. Uh, the former Delhi Chief Minister now, Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, has asked for elections to the Delhi Assembly also to be conducted in November alongside those for Maharashtra and Haryana. And then, of course, there are a series of other assembly elections that are lined up between now and December of next year. Bihar, uh, a very important state, is also due for elections next year. Plus, this announcement comes barely a few months after the Lok Sabha elections. Now, there's an interesting point, interesting recommendation that the Kovind panel, the high level committee, had made while endorsing the need for simultaneous elections. What was that recommendation? It basically said or set the framework that is required to roll out these simultaneous elections. And I'll just read that one recommendation. It said that the President of India may, by notification, issued on the date of the first sitting of the House of the People, which is the Lok Sabha, after a general election, bring into force the provision of this article meaning simultaneous elections, and that the date of notification shall be called the appointed date. Now, essentially, this recommendation meant that once a general election to the Lok Sabha is held and a new Lok Sabha is constituted, on the very first sitting, first day of that Lok Sabha meeting, that Lok Sabha being convened, a notification has to be issued by the President of India saying that synchronized polls will be rolled out. And that particular date would become the date from which you will start counting 5 years and arrive at the appointed date at which the elections have to be held simultaneously for all state assemblies and the Lok Sabha. Now, this is an interesting thing here because the other day, when these reports started coming out that the Union Cabinet is going to take up simultaneous elections and approve it, the Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, who is also a member of the Kovind panel, said that we will roll out simultaneous elections within these 5 years, which is before 2029. So the next time, the next general elections that happen in 2029 will be held simultaneously for Lok Sabha and the state assembly. Now that seems to be in a clear contrast of what the Kovind panel had recommended, because if they were to roll out that the scheme of simultaneous polls, the President of India should have issued that notification by now, because it's been you've had the inaugural session of the current Lok Sabha in the last week of June and the first week of July, and then you've also had the monsoon come budget session of the current Parliament. 2 sessions have gone by, the inaugural session and the budget session. The notification hasn't really come in. So how do you decide on the appointed date? Now, the government hasn't clarified whether they are going to amend or not accept this particular recommendation of the Kovind panel, or what is the alternative framework that they are looking at for choosing that appointed date at which simultaneous elections have to be held. The other recommendations that the Kovind panel had made include various amendments to the constitution that have to be made in order to streamline provisions of the constitution with the requirement for synchronized polls. There are two categories in which these amendments have to be made because these are constitutional amendments. The first category is of constitutional amendments that do not need to be ratified by state assemblies. Now, the government is fairly comfortable on that score because it needs these amendments to be passed by the Lok Sabha and to be passed in the Rajya Sabha. The second category of amendments, which deal with synchronizing the local body of the municipal elections, the panchayat elections, the Gram Sabha, municipal council, municipal corporation elections with the process of the Lok Sabha and the assembly elections, those are matters of a state subject. And so for those constitutional amendments, ratification by state assemblies, a majority of the state assemblies is required. That is where there is a problem for the government because various states have parties in power which are, in the opposition at the center, or which are basically anti-BJP, non-NDA parties. So whether they would play ball with the government on this score remains to be seen. The opposition today, while protesting against this move, said that this is merely a diversion. This is something that we are not going to allow, which is unacceptable, as Mr. Kharge said. And which is what makes this interesting, this announcement today, is that there is an indeterminate timeline for when these will be rolled out. The Union Home Minister has said that these will be rolled out within the next 5 years, and by 2029 they'll be simultaneous polls. The INB Minister today, when he spoke about the cabinet decision, refused or refrained from giving a timeline. He said further consultations are required, which again is a bit of, a bit of a confusing thought, because you had consultations, and that is something that the minister kept stressing on, that there were wide-ranging consultations conducted by the COVID panel, and an overwhelming majority were in favor of simultaneous polls. So if a wide-ranging consultation had already been held then, why is there a requirement for a wide-ranging consultation on the same issue now? That's one question. The second thing is, of course, that the minister has said that we need to have discussions on specific issues of how to come up with a common, uniform, one nation, one electoral roll for the entire country to roll out simultaneous elections. We also need to have consultations on the requirement for VVPATs, EVMs, the security deployment, etc., etc. Now, surprisingly, those are also issues that the COVID panel had taken up for discussion. So there has already been ample discussion on those specific points. Why the government wants to reopen discussions, only the government knows, because there were no clear answers from the minister. What is also interesting is that we've just come out of a 76-day long Lok Sabha campaign. Mind you, it was just a Lok Sabha campaign with, 2 odd states going for simultaneous polls alongside the Lok Sabha, 3 states, the states of Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and Arunachal. Now, to conduct those polls, it took the Election Commission of India 76 days. Imagine now a much grander scale, where you have not just the Lok Sabha, but also every single state assembly of the country. How many days is that going to take? Another example of one could call it, an unconvincing stance of the government, or a dubious stance, as its opposition calls it. You are currently having, or are in the midst of elections for J&K and for Haryana. Normally, the Haryana and the Maharashtra elections were held together. This time around, the Maharashtra elections are not being held alongside those for Haryana. And the reason that the Election Commission gave for its inability to conduct the elections for these two states simultaneously was that Maharashtra was going through a spell of monsoons, very severe monsoons, and the month of October and the month of September also had various festivals. And so, keeping in view the monsoons and the festival season, we don't want to, or we cannot have elections right now. So, when you can't even have elections for two states together without these problems, how is it that you're going to have elections for all state assemblies, parliament, municipal bodies, uh, you know, local civic bodies, all of them in one go? There's also the other issue, which the opposition and the critics of One Nation, One Poll have been talking about, which is the feasibility of the entire exercise in the sense that what happens, say, and we've seen ample examples of this happening. What if there is a government that falls because of a no confidence motion, or an election throws up a hung verdict, or the government falls for any other reason, maybe large scale defections, and the only way of having a new government installed is to go for fresh polls. And if it happens very soon after the current after the process of simultaneous polls is over, one can still say that okay, there's still 5 years of time to you know exactly the same tenure of an assembly or a parliament that uh, that's left, so it can be done. What if it happens 2 years after Parliament, after the new Lok Sabha has been uh, constituted, or after 3 years of an assembly being constituted? The Coven panel said in its recommendations that in case a Lok Sabha is to be dissolved because of any of these factors, fresh elections can be conducted, but then the tenure of that Lok Sabha will only be for the remaining tenure of the Lok Sabha that has been dissolved. In simple terms, if say the current government, which of course is on shaky grounds because it's no longer an absolute majority for the BJP, say tomorrow Chandrababu Naidu withdraws support from the current government, or Nitish Kumar withdraws support, or both of them withdraw support from to the Narendra Modi government, and the government falls, and the UPA, the India bloc, does not uh, form the government or is not able to shore up a comfortable majority to form the government, and you have to go in for polls, say, in 2026 or 2027. So, as per the formula prescribed by the Coven panel, the new Lok Sabha will only be for a term of 2 years till 2029 if the elections are held in 2027 by election. Similarly, for the state assemblies, if a state assembly that is constituted in 2025 uh, is, you know, would have its normal tenure in 2020, in 2030. But then, if simultaneous polls are to be rolled out, their tenure will be curtailed to synchronize it with the parliament elections. If the government of that state falls, say there's a government in place in 2029 when simultaneous polls are conducted, it falls in 2031, then it will only last till the new assembly that is constituted will only last for the remainder period of that term, which is till 2034, and not 2035 or 2036 as it should have ideally, which makes people wonder what is the great saving in cost that the government is going to make by synchronizing the election. If instead, in such a scenario, instead of an election once in 5 years, you'll actually have an election for the state assembly twice in 5 years. So where is the saving? Now, of course, governments don't fall every second day. There's no hung verdict that comes in ever so often. But that is a very valid concern being raised by the opposition. What also happens if, in case of an unstable government, and at the center, and the Lok Sabha is to be, dissolved for various reasons, you're going to inject more of an element of uncertainty, inject more funds, of course, and not to forget that the elections at this larger scale will have to be, carried out over a very long period. If you're not able to, as the opposition keeps saying, that if you're not even if the election commission is not even able to conduct the Lok Sabha elections in, say, 2 or 3 phases, you do it over 7 phases, spread across 76 days. Uh, then, if you have to do it for all the states and the Lok Sabha together, you'll possibly end up having, 3 or 4 or 5 months of elections in a year. Uh, the entire exercise stretching for that long. And then the opposition's, allegations and accusations of manipulation of the election machinery, an undue advantage to the power, to the party in power, all those come into the picture. Now, so these are the pros and the cons that, critics and supporters. The supporters say that it saves money. The supporters say that it minimizes the disruption, because every time an election is announced, uh, you have to impose model code of conduct. Government's work suffers. Development projects suffer because those cannot be rolled out. Although, again, surprisingly, the election commission has been saying for some time now that we've been reducing the restrictions progressively on what can be done while MCC or model code of conduct is imposed and what cannot. So, and then of course they say, those in support of this also say that, it's when you have multiple elections, several times spread over the, period of 5 years, you constantly have to divert security forces, uh, you know for conducting these elections. And so if you do it just once in a year, you can get it done in one go, and then the security establishment gets back to doing what it is meant to be doing. So there are, of course, there are concerns. There are also voices in support of it. But what makes this announcement today particularly surprising is that it comes with a indeterminate timeline, and so the motivations behind it are suspect, or so the opposition feels. Remember, in September last year, when the Narendra Modi government came up with the bill allowing for 33% reservation for women. That bill, again, was something that attracted the same allegations, that you're making a lot of song and dance about historic legislation, uh, but it's a legislation that is open ended because it does not come with a determinate timeline. We do not know when these reservations will actually come into play, whether the reservations will come into play in 2024 itself, or in 2029, or in 2035, 34. None of that is known. It's the same situation with One Nation, One Election right now. Uh, we do not know whether there will be a consensus among political parties for it. We do not know whether the states, which are ruled by opposition parties at the moment, the BJP's parties in the BJP's opposition, the Trinamool Congress in Bengal, or the Congress in Karnataka and Telangana and Himachal, or the DMK in Tamil Nadu, whether they will support amendments for synchronizing the municipal elections with the Lok Sabha elections. We do not know how much time the new consultation process that the government wants will take. So the obvious question is, why make this announcement right now, in the middle of an ongoing election campaign for 2 states, and without any real trigger for it? Also, since it's in contravention of the recommendation of the framework for rolling out simultaneous election that had been set out by the committee set up by the government, the Ramnath Kovind committee, which had said that it needs to be ratified on the very first day of the sitting of the first of the new Lok Sabha. So, as per that, you cannot have simultaneous elections in 2029, which is what the Union Home Minister has been saying, that we will do it before in 2029. So the motivations of the government are suspect. The what remains to be seen is whether simultaneous elections are going to become a reality anytime soon, or whether this is just another diversion from the current political, discussions, the assembly elections, uh, the opposition's talk on various other issues that they've been raising for some time now, whether it's unemployment, the state of the economy, the the issues with regard to border security, China, all of that. Whether this is just another diversion, we do not know. But this is certainly an issue that is going to generate a lot of political heat over the next few days. And surprisingly, without anyone knowing, including people in the government, on whether this is actually going to become a reality or not.